We're in very exciting times, and more we're being asked to dig a lot deeper. With me today is Jack Barnard, who is an expert on change. He's the guy that you go to change your way of seeing the world, to change how you see yourself, to change how you see things and how you engage. He's been my speaking coach. He's a dear friend. And today we're going to turn the tables. He's going to interview me on the new book coming out on the intelligence of the cosmos. It's a chapter that I have contributed to a book that's been compiled
thank you. That was a nice intro.
So, Jack, welcome to the Insight
Actually, I feel
a
little intimidated by myself suddenly. Thank you. Here's the cool part. Everything you do in its own way is a testimony to and a representation of the possibility of business, of the new purpose of business. Now, I know that's the name of your chapter, so but I want to get right to the heart of it, though, because you go straight into the idea that new science is here to help us somehow or another both recreate and expand the purpose of business. So what do you mean by the new science?
Well, the new science refers to the deep dynamic. It refers to both the visible and the invisible of, if we look at it in terms of the map of consciousness, it's about what can we see visibly, but what's underneath. So specifically in companies, there's a deep dynamic that runs the operation. And so when you understand the new science, so to speak, when you understand things through a much wider lens and both the tangible and the intangible, you get real insight into how to make better decisions and how to make change more effective, because mostly companies now struggle with making change, transforming their cultures into something that can cope with what's going on in the outside world. And of course, they only get incremental change as a result. But when you understand the new science, then you can start to see business in a completely different light, because it has a much more important role in terms of social health.
Okay, so let's get to the heart of the matter. What do you say the new science is telling us about the new purpose of business, the expanded purpose of business?
Well, for one, companies are fighting with low levels of engagement, for the most part. And the reason for that is that the goals that they have just about zero meaning. I mean, no one gets excited about making the next quarter. But right now, when you've got such big issues that we face, there's the effects of global climate change, there's social inequity, there's a lot of things going on in every country worldwide. And each of those issues becomes a massive opportunity to make a bigger difference, to do what Google calls it, make it a 10x goal. So the new purpose of business then speaks to going from thinking small to thinking big, and from thinking about you as strictly being a profit-making machine into a social driver for accomplishing a goal that you could never achieve on your own. So it does require the creative and a much wider spectrum of intelligences that people working inside companies and outside companies, the communities, can bring to the table. So it's a massive opportunity to turn stress-related illness, which is company-induced, into something.
All right, let's jump on that, because it seems like you're in essence saying two things, both of which I think we need to understand, we being your audience and so forth. Number one is that how does a company, if it starts to be aware of higher possibility, how does it start to move in that direction? And I say number two, what are the biggest obstacles to that for your average company out there?
Well, the big shifts are happening in many different ways, but for them, what ties it all together is switching to a values-based approach to decision making, having a much higher goal, a big goal to accomplish, one that, as I said in our last question, you can't achieve by working alone. So that's the starting point. But moving forward in terms of transformation, it doesn't matter whether you're a small company or a big company. The shift is towards self-management. It's towards giving autonomy back and giving the capacity for people to chart their own destiny while achieving a goal that's obviously relevant to the business purpose of the business and the higher contribution it can make. So what I'm seeing now, to answer the other part of the question, is the leadership challenge then is to let go of using tell, sell, yell as the management strategy and going into a more sophisticated set of skills. It's asking much, much more for leaders. The second part of it's asking for is more of a systemic view. So when companies get started, there's a desire for agility. Maybe they're using agile, or maybe they're using some other way of organizing their processes internally. But the bottom line is that you're working with short horizon cycles, so not long term. You're not working with a year's budgeting plan. Just forget that. It's bringing into a shorter horizon things. And one of my colleagues, Doug Kirkpatrick from the Self-Management Institute that Morningstar is a part of, in one of the podcasts I did, we talked about gamifying budgeting. And another one of my colleagues wrote about not having budgets at all. What it means is pushing back on the overall system. So people drive it. That's the shift from processes and systems driving everything to people driving it. And as soon as you start making those changes internally, as soon as you start saying, look, we want you to work, accomplish these kinds of goals, you're going to get pushback in a system. So this is where, expanded consciousness, looking at the whole picture, being prepared for surprises. What has often happened in the past when people have been asked to innovate and there's been surprises is they blame the people. That can't happen under these kinds of transformations. You have to actually recognize that, no, you're pushing back on performance management systems, you're pushing back on procurement, you're pushing back on budgeting. There's a bunch of stiffer systems inside that companies and people effecting change are going to run into. So if everyone's ready for that, and everyone knows that's going to happen, then what you're doing is seeing these collisions as more of a symptom of change. It means you're on the right track, and what you have to now do is tackle those kinds of
So I have a question. Is this a management issue more than anything else, or is it endemic in the whole, the average corporation, for example? Do the people inside the corporation, do they have an intuition that things need to change without maybe knowing how? Or is it management that's just stopping everything because that's how they get rewarded?
Well, it's both. That is part of the systemic interaction. Executives are being rewarded for getting higher return to shareholders, which in turn means they do unethical and unethical decisions, which in turn means if they get caught, like they did with Wells Fargo in the United States, they turned around and blamed the employees. And in the end, the executive got called up and actually had to pay it back. But that's unusual. For the most part, they get away with it. So these are the kinds of places where, yes, the employees are aware they're doing something unethical. They know it's wrong, and or they have an intuition that they need to be doing more. I've met both. I've talked to both groups of people. They have an intuition that they need to be doing more, but they don't have the autonomy to get it done. So the bottleneck, one of my colleagues in the United States has something called key hubs, and he does a little bit of an analysis of the hierarchy, and the pictures would actually surprise a lot of management because they believe they're the leaders, and yet the bottlenecks have big circles around those management positions. So the big shift then is moving away from authority as leadership, confusing those two, into leading being more self-managed, self-leading.
Okay, let's go to the book, because this basically is an alliteration of your chapter for Lazlo's book, The Intelligence of the Cosmos. What is the intelligence of the cosmos? And how does the cosmos, consciousness and the like, how does that have anything to do with, we little humans down here just trying to do something important for the day? Well, Ervin Lazslo presents a unifying view of consciousness, because
we tend to think of ourselves, we'll treat ourselves and our relationships like a department store. You go for your brain because that's where you think you're going to find rationality. Your emotions are for expression, and sometimes they're judged. And your body presumably just carries you around all day, which is a happy job. So we end up being completely unaware of the energy that surrounds us, and of what are the influences that impact our decision making, plus our own purpose. Why are we here? That grand existential question: what is the meaning of my life? And so that's what he's doing in The Intelligence of the Cosmos. My contribution was more practical, because in my work in companies, I watch emotions completely hijack decisions. These were emotions from people that claimed they had no emotions and were rational decision makers. And simultaneously, you'd see rationality go sideways when any one of the 150 odd cognitive biases would step in. So we're deluding ourselves in a lot of ways, and what that means is if we can look at it from a much more unifying view, we can stop the delusion and get on with something much better as humans. So we really have the chance now, especially with the complexity that companies are facing, with the need to come up to speed. There's lots of research out there now on businesses that are simply not prepared for the exponential change we're in. And the only way to become prepared is to become more of who you are as a human being. And we're so far just dancing around that. So great opportunities for us to become more aware of emotions, to work with them as an ally, as a navigational tool, to become more aware of what the environments are that we create for people to go to work every day. And
I'm going to be clear that I know what we're talking about. You're basically
with all
meshing
that knowledge, you've got a chance to
consciousness, awareness, spirituality, in quote marks, with the whole purpose, the premise, the mission of business. That's what it seems like you're doing. So having said that, you would think that the way that it's been, which is that now and then a business will change if there's enough, pressure kind of coming from the outside. And in other words, if the knock is loud enough and so forth. Here's my question. What's the biggest obstacle to that? I mean, what's the fear that gets in the way of companies truly taking steps up like that are better for society, one, and two, ultimately better for them? What's the biggest fear? What's the obstacle here?
I've asked a lot of people that, and watched myself what happens when people are asked to do something different, and consistently the answer is losing control. There's a fear of losing control. Now, what's hilarious about that is that in the spirit of energy principles, which physiotherapists
Sure.
and understand that quite well. Whatever you're afraid of, you will attract. It'll come in. You'll attract it. So what we're doing then is the idea of telling someone how to do what they've been hired to do has some addictive juice to it. But power over others, though, is not going to work anymore. It's just completely inadequate for making a fast response. You're basically suppressing, and this is how stress-related illness takes place, you're suppressing talent as opposed to engaging it. You gain control then by bringing it back into yourself. Instead of controlling others, you control your emotions, you control your responses, you shift how you see things, you change your perspective. You gain control over yourself. And that's how you gain control over all of the uncertainties that we're seeing today. There were 2 women in the Mexico earthquake who died from heart failure. Young women. Why? Well, because they hijacked themselves emotionally. This is a really extreme case. But in business, we see the same effect with stress-related illness, exactly the same. So the call then is to replace.
All right, I want to focus on
controlling
something.
others.
So here we have business
in yourself,
and looking
to
at
extend that trust
all
to
corporate,
others.
all business, et cetera, as an entity. And over here we have society, okay? Ultimately, the relationship that has happened between the two up till now they feed each other, it seems like. That's me saying that. You may have a different version of that. My question is, when you think about that relationship, the relationship of the people, the hoi polloi, and business itself, Where it has to shift there, or does it have to shift?
Yeah, no, this is a pretty exciting area for me because, and I think this is where we get to applaud. I certainly applaud the millennial generation because they are quite capable of seeing transparently into manipulation. So in the past, the relationship between companies and consumers has been around manipulating their attention to buy a specific product that they are wanting you to buy, and any ad person will tell you that that's exactly what the whole aim was. However, with capacity to see transparently into systems, to see transparently into motivations and what people are doing, decisions that are being made are more value based. So if you're not willing to work with me as a company, if you're not willing to value who I am, if I can't shape, co-design with you something that's better for the world, I'm not interested. And I'm, personally, from my point of view, when I hear that kind of thinking going on, and see the kinds of decisions that the millennials in particular are making, it brings everyone else who has this intuition that we could be doing, we need to be supporting business that's good for the world, business that's a force for good. So I think we're starting to see the big shift is coming from business that just, survived, made unethical decisions, chewed up and its customers over making money. That has no support in the new world. It has no support for simply because it's not only is it unethical, but it's also not supportable. You cannot you can't kind of wrap yourself around that. So I think that
if you look at the
mindset now
mindset
is that people
of
are getting increasingly
corporate,
engaged
let's
in
say,
shaping
up
what
till
companies
now,
will
up till
survive
your
and what
work and
companies will
others,
fail.
et cetera, the mind shift has been a whole lot about, how do we get the most from the people out there? How do we make the most money? Blah, blah, blah. Not like every company is the same, but just to be simplistic. So what kind of mindset shift really is required? How are we going to change this? It's one thing to say this is what needs to be changed. It's another thing to say, and if that changes, here's what will happen. It's a completely different game to say, here's how we do it. So how do we do it?
It's a great question because, and this is what I do a lot more speaking on now, and also a lot more workshopping now. So, unfortunately, the kinds of skills you require for this mindset shift are ones that apply to making better decisions in leadership. In other words, they've got multiple benefits. But making the shift goes from starting with being aware of when you're operating out of fear. Most companies that are absolutely terrified are working with one option, and the fear of failure is high, so there's no experimentation. They're looking for mistakes. They're ferreting out mistakes and punishing mistakes, and then in the same breath they'll be saying, "Would you go out and innovate?" Well, that doesn't work. So the shift then comes more from that kind of fear of failure into into more openness to learn. You use the failure as an ally for you. So it does require more emotional intelligence. It requires more social intelligence, and then you can actually start orchestrating that shift. Now, what's exciting about this for me is that when you start bringing in neuroscience, you change the language, the vocabulary that you use shifts. And so one of the things that companies talk about a lot is cutting costs. That's a fear-based language. And if you listen to that language with your emotions will tell you that you shrink. Oh gosh, does that mean I'm going to be cut next? So that's not going to work for you. But if you move the language towards saving costs, how can we save money? All of a sudden, the world opens up and you've got much more opportunities in front of you. So it's being very aware of how specific words in the language, that brings forward in our brain from a brain science point of view, but the body and your emotions give you the signals. They tell you what the response is. The second aspect of it that I think is really important is about focus. And it's people say, "Oh, I'm really super focused." Yeah, but it's not about whether you are focused or not focused. That's not the question. Are you aware of where you're putting your focus? Because when you become aware of where you put your focus, then you know when to switch it off and let your intuition show up, when to be able to hear the unsaid. And you can also switch it on when you need to actually get something done. So, the focus part of it is not about am I, off and on, binary switch. It's not off on. It's about where am I focusing. And easiest way to give an example of that is there's a certain bit of publicity going on now for the awareness of culture in mergers and acquisitions, which is awesome. But when you go into any places where two workplaces and two very different cultures start to collide, you will see people's energy go to, what's my place in this? Am I going to be okay? What are they doing with people? So the right away, the whole social energy goes to, am I going to be all right? Am I safe? Psychologically, emotionally, financially, all those questions pop up. And so when you understand that, then you can make your decisions to handle those kinds of emergent symptoms, those emergent dynamics. It's a very different stance from watching chaos unfold and folding your arms and then blaming the other culture or company for whatever happens, which is something that's happened in the past. So those are a couple of different examples. One of the other big things from a decision-making point of view is that a lot of companies base their decisions on their beliefs. So we believe that if your purpose isn't profit, you won't succeed. That's absolutely wrong. There's no shortage of research that shows that if you pick something big, you're going to give a much higher return to investors. The lampindex.com, I've been writing about them for a long time, since 2009 when we did podcasts. So we've got the research. B Corps are about that, and there's a number of other different kinds of governance structures and organizations and ways of getting things done that demonstrate that's an inaccurate belief. But it's a belief nevertheless. So if you can shift that to what do we value, and you can tell the difference between the two, then you can start to use, though everything pops up as an opportunity to learn. Even the worst things pop up as an opportunity to learn. If Wells Fargo had stepped back and looked at the dynamic and how those metrics created the outcome that they had to handle, they had in their hands a tool for really becoming an innovative financial institution. And it's almost like they looked at it and
Wells Fargo is a good example because they got poisoned by their leaders. Let's go to leadership for a second. Everything comes down to that. We're still in a follow the leader consciousness as far as society is concerned, both politically and in business and culturally, et cetera. So when we're looking at business and we're looking at the evolution of business and the upgrade of purpose for business, what skills do leaders today need?
There's several that land in one area, but let's start with what we were talking about already, which is emotional responsibility and awareness. Because if you have a fear-based environment, you have a less chance to take the risks you need to take in order to survive as a company, much less innovate or anything else or engage. So being able to use your empathy, compassion, things that robots can't do, essentially, you gain access to intuition. So emotional responsibility and awareness is sort of like the prerequisite for being able to develop collective intuition within the company itself. And when you get to that level, then you're able to actually use the best of who we are as human beings. So that's big. And what that means for people, if you're listening to this program, what that means is simply being aware of when you're feeling completely contracted as opposed to feeling at peace and being happy in the work you're doing and feeling some level of satisfaction with the contribution. So even if you're being asked to make a very tough decision, and you've got you can take a 15-second breather just to bring your heart into a state of coherence. And the research on the HeartMath Institute is there to support this. You're going to be making better decisions. The next area is overcoming adversity. So one of the qualifiers, if you will, for the new leadership is if you've overcome adversity, learned from it, and become a better person through it, then you are well equipped to step up to a leadership role in today's world, because that capacity for transcending adversity means that you've handled these tough issues. You've gained a place in your mind where you know a good outcome, or you believe a good outcome is in your direct control. It's not an accident that things turn out. It's because you know you can accomplish something. That is what is known as self-efficacy. That's massive. So if you've been, many of you have been listening to this who have faced adversity. You've been in training, and that's exciting. You can now use that. I think one other area that we underestimate is the amount of courage and perseverance that's required. Because when you hear companies, when I hear people that are working inside companies like Wells Fargo or any other big old massive machine, traditional machine, they are going, yeah, I can see this, and I'm dying to go to work. I feel suffocated when I go to work every day, but I'm afraid to quit my job because the benefits are too good, so there's this tension between what I want to do in the world and who I believe, how I believe I can contribute, and the machine that, and the traditional structure of the machine, which is, very difficult. So I think if you're going to break through that, and this is why boomers at the older age, the boomer executives are just going, I'm just going to wait till I get my check, my retirement fund. But the young people have to make that decision around, is this something I even want to do? And if I go to be a startup, you're going to need exactly the same skills I just listed. That doesn't change one bit. But the courage and perseverance to kind of stick with your vision, to stick with your sense of purpose is absolutely critical.
Coming near the end now, I want to go right to the heart of something. There's kind of an elephant in the room here, which is the idea that big companies can't change, they can't transform, that it's impossible for them. Wells Fargo, a good example. I mean, they're right here in California, and yet the truth of the matter is that when you read about what they did and what they're doing about it, you don't believe either one. That nothing's going to happen. It's blink your eyes. Wells Fargo is going to be doing the next mortal sin. So let's go to that. The feeling that it's impossible for big companies to change, to transform. Obviously, you're saying that's not true.
Yeah, I am. I mean, a number of change agents, my network in the change agent community is global, and we've had this conversation where some of us have been consulting inside these companies, and you're looking at the mindset, like for, Wells Fargo being case in point, and you think, okay, there's no chance here. However, you will come across companies that make decisions to be progressive without having to. They're not against the wall. They haven't hit crisis mode yet. And so they're looking down the road, which means it's not a fear-based culture, because in a fear-based culture you'd have no chance of being able to see ahead. So they're looking down the road and they're saying, how can we do this better? And they're, for example, a traditional hierarchy, and they're saying, okay, we need to shift. Well, the companies that have succeeded in doing this, large companies that is, have done so because they've got a clear vision for what their purpose is in the world, how they want to serve people in the world, their customers, maybe it's society, or bigger. Secondly, they operate based on a set of values, and they make their decisions based on that. So it's not the kind of posters you see that say, this is our values, we're going to put that on the wall. No, they live by their values, and they're plugged into their decisions. So it is a principle that you can use to say, all right, does this accomplish systemic health for us? And if it does, then it's in. And if it doesn't, you want to look at it and say, well, is this a one-off? Or you make a different decision, but you make a decision with awareness. And finally, they're all working with self-managed teams. So a good example is Chinese manufacturing giant Tower. They've reinvented themselves multiple times, about 70,000 people. They have 4,000 self-managed teams. Those teams have autonomy, they have control, and as a consequence, Hire is one of the most innovative companies in the world, manufacturing companies in the world. Now, it didn't start that way, but it took a visionary leader to sort of say, look, this isn't working, and we're here to create something that works. But because they have these teams, their capacity for responsiveness is much higher than any other certainly than it would have been under traditional.
Okay,
but it keeps
we're at
them
the end
on
pretty
the
much. I'm going to
edge
ask you
all the
3 or 4
time, as opposed
questions. I'm
to
going to ask
sitting
you, if you
back in the
will,
armchair with a
this is
remote
just to
control.
have summary, to get right to the heart of the matter and give me no more than 3-sentence answers. All right. Question number 1 is, how would you describe the situation that business is in today, the challenge that you're trying to meet? How would you describe it?
The challenge that business has today is to adapt or die. I believe it's that bold.
Okay, so
The
how would you
statistics
describe then,
on
having said
longevity
that,
show
the new
that. I
possibility, the
think it's a
new
bold
potential
leadership
purpose
place
of
to be in.
business?
The new potential purpose of business is to restore some of the health that's been lost environmentally, ecologically, and socially. So big things like
All right.
restoring social
What do you feel
health,
is the
social
biggest
equity.
block, the
Not
biggest
small
challenge
stuff,
that
stuff
business
that,
might
that you
have
really
in
need to
doing
step
that?
up for. Their own ego would be the short answer. And when I say that, I mean that the ego shifts from am I here just to survive, protect my place in
Okay,
the
and the
world,
last
or
question
at a
then,
higher
when
level
you
of
look
ego,
at
how
what
do I
the
trust
talent
working with
or
other people
tools that
to
are
accomplish something
necessary to
bigger?
make this happen, in short, when you get right to the heart of the matter, what's going to happen to make a shift for business in the way that it creates its new purpose in life?
From a decision-making point of view, mapping the impact of the decision is the most logical place to find out that your decision goes places. It has an impact. Business has done very little of that, and it's cost themselves a lot of money. There's a young entrepreneur in the Netherlands right now that's cleaning up plastic and valuable garbage that has been thrown away by companies. So that would be a logical one. The second one would be being able to step back, distance from the situation, and observe. Because that's the place. Like if Wells Fargo had done that, they would not be down the path they're in. They would
Bonus
have been able to
question, are
pivot.
you confident
But you
all
can't
this is going
make
to
those
happen
changes
in
in
your
direction
lifetime?
if you're in the thick of the weeds. I think that if it doesn't happen, these companies will not survive. It's accelerating.
Okay,
Complexity
thanks,
is
Dawna.
accelerating. I think it absolutely. I think it's going to happen a lot sooner than people think. Thanks, Jack. Thanks so much for doing that, Jack. I really appreciate it, and I hope people take the chance to get a hold of the book, The Intelligence of the Cosmos. It's Ervin's work is outstanding. He's always done an amazing job at making sense of the invisible stuff that many of us have an intuition about, but not able to frame it into anything that makes sense. So,
You're
so
very welcome, no
I
problem.
encourage you to
It is
take a look at The
fitting
Intelligence
that
of the
we
Cosmos. And
are
Jack, I
having a
really
conversation
appreciate
about
you
Ervin
helping me out
Lazslo's
with
The
this.
Intelligence of the Cosmos pretty much a year after he released What is Reality, which was episode 1 of this podcast, the opening episode of this new podcast of mine, the previous one being The Evolutionary Provocateur. This is the close of season 1. We're moving into season 2 now. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for sharing. My name is Dawna Jones. I'm your host, and what I do in my work is help organizations adapt their decision making to fit complexity, speed, and to help transformational leaders work with those and see those deep dynamics so you can make transformation much faster, much easier. Thanks for joining me.